So before we do any further work here on that blade, I actually want to be working on these little knobs that are sticking out of it. And for that, I'm gonna select our high poly model, take it into isolation mode. Before that, I had it in transparency mode, so just make sure to press Alt X on it so you see it without transparency as a solid material color here. And I'm gonna have it in the left orthographic view and select a cylinder here. And actually I want to be in our top view. So let's navigate to our sword here. And I'm gonna have this cylinder here dragged into the canvas. And I'm having 12 sides on it. So now we can go back to the left orthographic view and position it here in the side view. And then drag it over here so that it pretty much fills the bottom of where this knob comes out. And now let's just convert it to an editable poly. Right click and editable poly. Then let's go over to our polygon mode. I select the top polygon, press Ctrl I and delete everything else. So now we go over here to the border mode and select the whole edge loop basically. Go over here to our scale tool, press Shift and drag it out here to all sides. And now we can go back to our polygon mode and delete the center polygon because we only want to have this ring basically for the moment. Just gonna close the material editor so we see more. And now if we take a look at this, we can see that this is actually on an angle here, our sword. So what I'm gonna do is I want to go over here to these control points, go back to our move tool, and now this is one of these bugs that the FFD modifier has. So what we have to do is go back to our border selection and drag some edge loop down there. So now if we put the FFD modifier back on, go to control points, we can actually work with it. It's kind of annoying. It's one of these things that 3D Max does, and I don't know why, but essentially we want to make sure that this ring is as close as possible to the high poly when it comes to the angle. That we have the same surface there pretty much. Let's select these guys here at the back and drag them up a bit more. And also here on the y-axis, I'm gonna drag it a bit to the back. And here on the side, let's drag it in a bit. So essentially we want that ring to go all around this high poly element that we have there. This tooth. I'm actually not sure if it's a tooth, but this spiky element, you could call it. So let's just take some time to... So once we have this here in place, let's right click the FFD modifier and say collapse to. And now let's go back here to our border mode, select the inner ring, and I want to be in the left orthographic view and drag it out here on the y-axis and go back with an FFD modifier on this active selection and start positioning this ring here further around this tooth. Let's also have a look at it here from the front view. Select the control points on the side and then just circle around it to make sure it's as close as possible to the high poly. So a bit more here. And then let's collapse it. And let's have our border mode back on here and drag out another loop. So I'm just gonna have the FFD2 modifier for this one and drag that up here. Only have the control points there at the back selected. And here I'm just gonna select the ones on the top. And here let's just select all of them. And as you can see, this way we can basically retopo around our high poly. Even though we are not making use of the Retopo tools right now, this is basically just traditional modeling here around our high poly model. Remember to press F3 to go see the wireframe mode, which can be quite useful to toggle every once in a while. And I want to go back here in the left orthographic view and drag out another loop. So now I'm just going to go over here to our scale tool and pretty much scale it so that it fits, move it a bit here on the x-axis, and here on the left it looks like we can drag it down a bit more. And now let's just use our FFD modifier 2 here on it as well. I'm gonna select these 2 points here at the side and drag it in a bit. Let's collapse it and go back to our border mode and drag out our last loop that we need here, which I'm gonna collapse. So now let's just select this vertex point and let's just position it so that it looks more pointy. I'm gonna double click this edge loop here, put our FFD2 modifier back on and just reposition it a bit more here with these control points on the top and collapse it. So now we have this pretty much finished here for this one. And later we can just copy it to the other side. But for now we have also this element pointing in the other direction here. So I'm just gonna press Shift, make a copy, and then mirror it on the y-axis. Say OK to that. And now let's go over here to our toolbar and say Reset X Form. Let's go back here to the modifiers, collapse that Reset X modifier, select this element and flip it, because when you use symmetry, the polygons get inverted, and Reset X Form makes sure that this gets fixed. And that way we have this element here to work with now. Let's just push it down a bit on the z-axis. And here also on the x-axis, and let's just position it as much as we can here to fit that high poly. I'm gonna go over here to our edge mode and I'm gonna make a ring selection here on this, convert it to polygons, grow the selection, and then use our FFD2 modifier on it. Let's go over to the control points to make this here more accurate at the bottom. This is where it really matters, because this is what we're gonna weld into the blade part later on. Let's also take the control points here at the back. Let's just take a look at it. Actually, this is looking pretty good. I just want to have it here at the front raised up a bit more. And now here we can just push it down a tiny bit more. So this is looking pretty good. Here at the back we can push it a bit more to the left side on the y-axis as seen from that angle. And then here on that side, let's push it to the right. So now we can collapse the FFD modifier, and then in our edge mode we can then individually select these loops here, like that one, and go back to FFD. Let's select the control points there and then push it here on the y-axis so that this wraps around as good as it can. Here on the side, I'm also going to position it a bit more. And let's take a look at it here from all sides. I'm going to take this individual control point here and drag it also more to the high poly. And let's take these two and push it a bit more here to the left. Let's collapse this. And then the next one up here, I toggle between the transparency mode, Alt X, and then also here with the FFD modifier, same thing really. Let's select all four here at the back and just bring it up a bit. And here at the front, let's also push it more to the geometry there. And other than that, let's collapse it and take that vertex point here, convert it to polygon so that we have the whole selection, and then just raise it up a bit here. Maybe a bit here to the side. And I'm gonna use the scale tool to make that a bit smaller there. Always important to rotate around, see if it fits from all sides. And I'm just gonna take this ring here, make a ring selection and connect it, because I feel like we need to have a bit more information there, more curvature. So I'm gonna take FFD 2 modifier, back to our move tool, and then just have a bit of a curve there, which was missing before. Let's select these points here and also push it on the x-axis further towards the high poly. And other than that, this is looking good. I'm gonna collapse it. And I want to go back here to our edge mode, and let's select one of these edges, make a ring selection, convert it to poly, and then grow the selection, and then let's delete it, because all we want to have is this element here. And the same thing here on that side. Let's take any of these edges here. I'm gonna make a loop here in that case. Same result really. Just delete it then. Grow the selection and delete it. So now we have these two pieces here. Let's go over here to attach and attach them together. Now let's put the focus back on the blade part of the sword. Okay, let's get out of the attach mode. I still had that on here. I'm not actually attaching it here. I'm just making a selection here for these two knobs and the rest of the sword and take them into isolation mode. So I changed my mind about this blade part. I'm sorry for the work that we already did on it. And the reason is that it's easier and better for us to import the original block out part of the blade that we did. That way we don't have to do so much cleanup work here. And right now, let's just make sure we have this selection here, these polygons, and then we can delete them. And then we will swap them out with the original block out blade. Let's go over here to attach and attach these two objects that we just created earlier. So that basically leaves us here with this here that we still have to clean up. And now we're going to import our original blade part. So first of all, let's make sure we save our current scene. And now that this is saved, we're gonna go over here to File. And then we navigate to our original blockout file. In my case, sword.max. Gonna select this blade part here. Get rid of the turbo smooth and chamfer, or basically you just want to uncheck it for now. Go over to File, Save Selected, and then I'm gonna call it sword_blade and save it as a 3D Max file. So now we can go back to our last save file here. You may have noticed I have quite a few save files there. Usually I don't like that, but when I create tutorials, it's always good to have several save files in case I have to roll back here. So now we are back to this scene here. let's open up the Scene Explorer and let's activate the low poly folder. This is the one that needs to be active. Let's go over here to import and merge. And then let's double click this file that we just saved out, which only should consist out of one element here. And it looks like it came in the wrong way. So we're gonna have to rotate it 90 degrees like this. And then 180 here on this axis. Use our move tool here to put it into the right place. And the good thing is that this original blockout model was our base when we imported it to ZBrush, and therefore it fits like a glove. So we should have just done this from the start, and I shouldn't have added the blade part to the Z-remeshed bits back when we were in ZBrush, but it is what it is. I'm gonna delete the modifiers here, the chamfer and the turbo smooth. They were still on there. Gonna make sure the x-axis and the z-axis is at 0. So make sure to check for that before we add our symmetry modifier and put it to the z-axis here. And essentially we're gonna do the same thing as before, where we add two symmetry modifiers. Here I'm gonna have it on the y-axis, and then we uncheck the weld seam on both and collapse it. And that way we can then use our element selection here and delete the right side as well as here the one at the bottom. So that leaves us then only with this one part that is perfectly symmetrical to all sides and makes it easier for us here to work on it. So I have these two pieces here selected and I took them into isolation mode. So far it's not attached yet. As you can see, these are two different elements, and we are going to attach and weld them together in a moment. For now, we just have to get rid of some of these parts here on the blade, which we already got covered there in the Z-remeshed version. So I want to take these vertex points and align them on the x-axis. And now let's delete everything that's left of it here, as seen from that perspective. And I also want to delete these parts here, zoom in there to make sure this one is also deleted. And this leaves us then here pretty much with a base that we can use to attach to our rest of the sword. I'm gonna go over here to the edge constraint mode and drag this over here so that it's more in place. And now I'm gonna select this element here, the big one, and attach it here together with the other one. We can ignore this warning that pops up there. And now I want to make a double click here to get the whole edge loop of this bevel that we got there. I'm gonna press Alt on the first edge at the front, and everything else here I'm gonna go over here to edge constraint again and drag it up a bit on the Z and the X, basically by holding this yellow quad icon there. So now it's time to switch over here to our vertex mode and go over to our target weld. And I want to connect this vertex point here as well as the other one to be welded here to our block out blade part that we just imported. And I'm gonna do some more target welding here so that we don't have so many edges there. And this part here I'm gonna connect like that, or weld like that. This one here. And now we have this gap there which we're going to fill in just a moment. And before we get to that, let's jump out here. And I just want to select the sword part without this leather band. So basically the high poly bits here for this as well as our low poly for it. And that way we get a better sense for where our low poly geometry should be. So let's see what we got here. I want to go actually over to vertex mode and select that vertex that is here at the bottom. And then on the y-axis, I'm gonna push it so that it is consistent there with our high poly. And now I'm taking this edge and I want to get out of the edge constraint mode. Actually, I'm just gonna take this vertex here. Sorry for the back and forth. Now let's go back here to our edge. And what I wanna do is press Shift, pull out a new polygon, and then followed by another one. So now we have these steps here, and now I want to align this one on the z-axis. That's why it's important not to be an edge constraint. And now we have another one following down here as we press Shift. And I'm gonna just go into polygon mode and push it a bit against the high poly so that it's more in place there as it should be. So now we have to weld that. I'm just gonna jump out of the isolation view for the high poly and have it only here for our low poly. So I'm gonna go over to vertex mode and I'm gonna use the cut tool in order to weld this together here. So I'm gonna use the cut tool and start from this point and then just confirm it there with this edge and another one here. Just click it, and that way we made these 2 points. And now on the edge constraint selection, we can just drag it here on Z and Y so that it's in place with what we have there. And this one here, I'm gonna go out of the edge constraint mode, go over here to our right orthographic view, and make sure that this vertex point here on the Z axis is at 0. These two here, I'm gonna also put them to 0 by right-clicking this little arrow with the right mouse button. And now we can go over here to target weld and then connect these vertex points with the ones that we were just creating there with the cut tool. And that way we already have this here combined. So now let's see where we want to strike next. I want to connect these here also with our target weld. So let me just check here. Let's go out of target weld and see if this vertex is only one vertex, which it is. This one here says 2, so we have to weld it. So now let's go over here to the border mode, select this gap and cap it. And now I'm gonna take these 2 vertex points and connect it here. And now let's just go to polygon mode, select these 2 polygons and assign our gray material to it so that we have a better separation there visually. Let's go to element mode and select both of these spikes that we created earlier and let's detach them. Let's get out of the element mode. And what I want to do is prepare them so that we can weld them also together here with the rest of the blade. Let's go over to border mode and I just want to push it down here a bit on the Z-axis so that this actually intersects. Or on a second thought, let me undo that. And instead, I'm just gonna drag down a new set of polygons here by pressing Shift. And do the same here on that side. And now let's cap it. Let me just take it into isolation mode so you see that this here is capped. And here we have to do the same thing. And that way our Boolean operation will work without problems. Everything needs to be closed and capped. But first, I want to go back here to the blade. And I want to go here in edge constraint on this edge loop and push it a bit into a better place for when we do this Boolean operation in just a moment. Next, I'm going to select these 3 edges here. And I want to have another edge connection here. I'm gonna align it. Let me undo this here on the y-axis. Sometimes it takes a while. Make sure to have edge constraint on while you do that. And now connect these guys here so that we have a nice connection there. And I'm just gonna go over here to our compound objects. Select Pro Boolean, no edge removal, and here we want to have union and then start picking, and then select these spikes here, these teeth, and that way we have them welded together. But now let's right click it here, go back to our editable poly mode, go into edge mode, zoom in here, and then this loop here we can just control and backspace it. So here we have to do the same thing, control backspace on this loop. And now if we go to vertex mode, you can see that through that Boolean operation, we have some extra vertices. And we want to use our turn to poly modifier here, which magically gets rid of it. You can see it if you toggle it. And you will find it here in the modifier list. That's why in the earlier part of the tutorial I was saying it's good to have the same modifiers. And then we just collapse that and have basically a cleaned up version here, and go back to target weld to connect some of these vertices already that we already had there in place. This one I'm gonna take over here. And now let's see how we connect the rest here. Let's get out of the target weld mode. And with our vertex selection still active, we can then make some connections. We can also select multiple vertex points by pressing Ctrl. So we want to make sure that everything here is connected. This one here is a little tight there, but that's okay. Gonna select this one here, connect it, and then I'm gonna select these two and connect it here to that upper point, and that leaves us here with this one, and that can also go there. So on a second thought, this is a bit too tight. I'm gonna press Ctrl backspace on this edge and then make a connection over here. And while we're at it, I want to connect these two here, and then go back to edge mode and Ctrl backspace on this edge. And now let's go have another connection here. And back into target weld mode, let's connect this like that. So I know this is a little bit back and forth. It's a bit of a mess, but this is just sometimes how it is with these kinds of things. But at the end, we're gonna have a very nice low poly mesh with a perfect bake. And now we just have to sit through the pain of actually creating it. That's just a part of it. I'm just gonna connect more here. Select these vertex points, make a connection. And essentially, that's already it. Here, one more. And now let's see what else we can optimize on this. Let's zoom out here. And as the next thing, I want to focus here on the blade where we have this so-called fuller on the high poly, this gap that goes almost to the tip of the sword. And I want to add some actual geometry there where now it's just flat entirely. But before we do that, let's clean that up a bit here, do some extra work here. So first of all, I'm gonna take this vertex here, go over to our edge constraint mode, and then push it over here on the y-axis. And then with our edge mode, let's make a ring selection here, and then let's collapse it. Remember, we also have a shortcut for that. I'm going to Ctrl backspace this edge. And let's go back here to our cut tool on the vertex mode. And now I'm just gonna cut in already pretty much the path all the way here to where this goes. And then click down here and then connect it there at the bottom. Let's just double check that this is only one vertex. So I'm going to go out of the cut mode for that. And now we can select these polygons and then delete them. So now back to our vertex mode. I'm going to make a connection here so that this is also triangulated. And now we have these two vertex points, which while we are in vertex mode and have edge constraint on, I'm going to bring down here on the Z axis and further down, and then this one here also individually bring it further down. So that way we already have this curvature there that we need. And now let's select these edges here, 4 of them. This is basically a straight line. And we want to get out of the edge constraint mode and then use the Shift key to drag out some steps here. So I'm gonna use the first step, position it a bit here in place. Shouldn't be too sharp of an angle. Just gonna toggle the transparency mode here with Alt X to see where we are. And then I'm gonna pull out another line here. And then followed by another. So this way we have this curvature there. I'm just gonna go back here to this line and drag it a bit further in there so that we have a bit more of a curvature. Then let's go back on this one. Remember, double clicking an edge will make a whole loop selection for it. So now it looks okay. I'm gonna drag out one more line and align it here on the X-axis. Just click that little button there, the little arrow button. So now let's select this line here, make a loop selection and convert it to poly by pressing Ctrl. And now with that selection, let's take our FFD2 modifier, go over here to the control points. And actually I don't want to select these points. Let's just select these here for now. And then on the Z axis, I'm just gonna push it down just a bit. Something like this here. And then we can already collapse our FFD modifier. So I'm just gonna toggle F3 here to our wireframe mode. Select these 2 vertex points, or actually it's 3 of them. And then on the Z axis, push it up so that they basically appear again. And now I'm gonna select these edges here. And while we press Shift, I'm gonna drag them out on the Y axis and push it up here on the Z axis. So now let's go back to vertex mode and target weld, and I'm gonna connect it like this here, and then this one I'm gonna connect here over to that shape. And this point here, let's bring it down on the Z axis. And let's take another look here in our wireframe mode. I'm gonna take these 2 edges here and push them out while pressing Shift. And then it's another matter here of target welding it. Bring it together like this here. So now we still have this gap here. I'm gonna get out of the target weld mode. And in that case, I don't want to use the border mode. I'm just gonna use our edge mode here. Drag out another polygon with Shift. So with this edge selection active, we're just gonna collapse it so that it basically becomes a triangle. And then with target weld, we can just connect it here to this point. So now we have this fuller, if I pronounce that correctly, pretty much worked out here on our low poly, but we still have a bit of work to do here on that part. So let's see how we do this. I'm gonna take these 2 edges and use the bridge command to make a connection there, like the name suggests. So let's see how we connect the rest here. I want to add another edge here in between these two. So let's select these two edges and connect them. And now here with the vertex, I'm gonna go over to edge constraint and just curve it down a bit there. So now we can bridge it again, these two here. And then that leaves us here with this gap, and I'm just gonna use border mode here for the whole thing and cap it. And then let's go over to our vertex mode and make a connection here. So I'm just gonna take a look here at the triangulation, and I think it's better if these two here are also connected. And then let's take this vertex point and drag it here a bit to the right side on the y-axis while we have edge constraint mode on. And overall this is looking pretty good here. Let's take another look here at the front. And I think we have too many vertex points here. So what I'm gonna do is go over to target weld and weld these together. And then these two here, let's just push them down a bit so that we actually make use of the geometry that we have there. Before it was just flat and didn't do anything really. And then this one here, let's connect it. And then let's switch over to our edge mode. And this loop, I'm just gonna control backspace, get rid of it. And then let's make sure that this here is somewhat aligned. Just gonna push that. And back to our edge mode. I'm gonna make a ring selection here, and then let's collapse it. And then while we have edge constraint on, I'm gonna push that over here so that we have it in the center. And I feel like it was a mistake to add so many edge loops there at the bottom. What I'm gonna do is zoom in here, select this edge, make a loop for it, and then I'm gonna collapse it because we don't really need to have that many edge loops there. So now let's take a look here at these sides of the blade part, and I want to go over here to our top view, orthographic, get out of the edge constraint mode and just position everything a bit better and make sure that we just have a nice edge flow and silhouette. And this here, for example, looks too low poly for me. So what I want to do is go over here, put it to transparency mode, select these vertex points, and also position it so that it follows the high poly in a better way. And now let's make a selection here on these edges, connect them, and then push it up on the x-axis so that we have a nicer curve there. And these individual ones here, I'm just gonna push just a little bit back. This looks nice and rounded. That's what I want, to really have it as close to the high poly as possible. I'm gonna add another edge connection here and also position it so that we have a slight curvature there. Let me just go into the isolation mode here for our low poly, and I want to make a connection here. And let's get out of it again so that we see the rest of our sword. And what I want to do is go over here to vertex, and let's select these vertex points here. Press Ctrl to select multiple ones, and I want to select them all the way here to the front pretty much, because we have this bit of a gap, and I want to bring it further here to the center so that this gap disappears and it's as close as it can be to the high poly. So let's take a look here. This one here we can individually move on the x-axis. And then we have the tip of the sword. Just gonna bring it a bit here to the left on the y-axis. And this way we make sure that the low poly is as close to the high poly as possible. I'm gonna make another connection here and slightly push it out so that we have a bit more curvature here. And I'm gonna do the same thing here. Just give it a slight push. And let's see where else we can do some work. Let's take this edge loop here and we want to chamfer it. The amount can basically stay like it is. That is good. And that way we also have a bit more of an interesting low poly shape there. Shouldn't be looking too low poly. That's why it's good to invest some extra edges there where it's curvy. And so far, I think we did enough work on the blade for now. Let's take this piece here, the leather straps, and this one still has the pivot out of place from when we originally imported it. I'm gonna go over here to Effect Pivot Only and center it on X, Y, and Z. Get out of the Effect Pivot mode. So now we actually have the pivot here in the center of this. And now let's get rid of some of these edge loops because this is too high poly at the moment still. Let's start here with these two. I'm gonna make a ring selection and make use of our collapse shortcut that we set up earlier. And let's see where we do that as a next thing. Let's select this one. I'm also gonna collapse it. And this one here, I'm just gonna select this loop and control backspace it. And here, same thing. This one can also go. And this way we don't have such a high poly count on it. I'm gonna take both of them here into our isolation view. Makes it easier to see what we're working on. Gonna have another ring selection here and collapse it. And here as well. Let me undo that to see if that works. Yeah, let's collapse this. Now let's take a look at it here from the front. I want to select this edge and also here on that side. Make a loop and collapse it. And here in the inside we have quite a few loops, way too many. So let's also make some ring selections here, loop it. Oh no, I should say ring it and collapse it. Also here in the inside. And then these two here. That way we save quite a few polys. And just one by one, we trim this down here. Let's see here. Also another one, ring and collapse. This one here can also go. Control backspace. And then here, this one as well. And also here, another one that can be collapsed. This one here can also go. And let's see what else we got. I still want to maintain a bit of this curve, so we shouldn't be collapsing everything here. This one here can go. And now let's select this edge loop here. Just gotta make sure I select the right one here on the outside and push it to the left here to support more the original high poly where this edge should be. This one here can also be collapsed. And let's just take another look here. This one looks a bit distorted, so I'm gonna go over to edge constraint while being in vertex mode. Oh, let me undo that and bring that down here on the Z and the X so that we have a better edge flow there. And now I'm gonna use symmetry modifier, and something is slightly offset there. So what I'm gonna do is select all these vertex points here, and for some reason this is not perfectly at 0 on the x-axis. I'm gonna align it on X and then right click this little arrow button. So now this is perfectly centered and we can use our symmetry modifier. I'm gonna flip it, and now what I want to do is add another symmetry modifier, put it to Z, and let's take a look if everything looks right. It's looking pretty good, but I want to go back to editable poly, zoom in here on this vertex and just push it over here to the side while being out of the edge constraint mode. So now we can put that back on, and this is pretty much finished here, this element. And let's go back here to this element here. Let's switch to our vertex mode, and I'm gonna select these vertex points that we have here and push them here to the front. Once again, so that this is better aligned with our high poly. And I'm gonna use our target weld here and weld it together because we don't need to have so many edges there. Let's get out of target weld, and I want to drag this point here a bit closer. Also push it up a tiny amount on the Z-axis and control backspace on this edge and connect this a bit better here. This way we have a better triangulation there in place. And let's zoom in here on this part where we also have some optimizing to do. Same as for this whole region where we have quite a few edge loops. So what I want to do is take that into isolation mode here. Make a ring selection here. And then let's press Alt to deselect some of these edges. I'm gonna just deselect this one there, where it's basically this junction. And then I want to deselect the ones that we have here, where this tip basically starts. And I also want to deselect everything that is here on the blade. And that leaves us then with this selection here. I'm gonna just add these edges here to it with Control. And now with this selection here, let's just take another look at it. Coming in here, let's collapse it, which will save us quite a few polygons as well when it comes to the poly count. Let me go into this one here and target weld it. And yeah, a lot of it is jumping in and out of the isolation view. And these edges here need a better alignment. So let's get out of isolation mode and see how this is looking on the high poly. And essentially I want to drag these vertex points up so that if you look at them horizontally, they are more aligned. And not too much up and down. Let's also take these points and drag them on the x-axis. Once again, all about the alignment here right now. This one here can be brought down a bit. And yeah, it's a pretty organic looking part there. It has a lot of curvature. So we just want to make sure that this is aligned as good as it can be. And let's see, we have a bit of a problem here. So let's go over to our edge mode and have a selection for these two edges, which we're gonna connect. And then also here in vertex mode, let's connect this. And then drag these points here further to the high poly. And I'm actually gonna have another selection here. And I'm also gonna connect it over there. And then also drag it so that we have a nice curve there. And then we just have to connect this vertex point here. First I'm gonna drag it out a bit and then connect it. And this way, this area there is looking pretty good. This point here can be brought down a bit. Once again, it's all about looking at the high poly and see how it moves. And since it's a pretty organic shape, it has lots of ups and downs. This here can also be positioned a bit better. Sometimes it's really just about the edge flow. And now I'm not happy with this vertex point here, so let's also push it more on the x-axis towards the high poly. Let's take a look here on our low poly in the isolation view. And I'm not quite happy with this eye. So I'm gonna make a connection here with a cut tool. And then target weld it like this. So now we have a bit more polygons or vertex points to work with here. Gonna control backspace on this edge. Basically just making sure it's as quad as it can be when we look at it here. Later when we export it, it's going to be triangulated anyway. But basically just while we work on it, it's nice to keep it in quads. Gonna select these two edges here and collapse them. And now let's take a look here at where we have this nose. First of all, I want to make a connection here. And I'm not quite liking this part here. So what I want to do is add an extra edge there. I'm gonna select these edges here individually while pressing Control. And now I'm gonna make a connection. And let's switch over to vertex mode. And pretty much just bring this down so that we have it closer aligned here to our high poly. So this vertex point here, I'm gonna also align it a bit better here. And now I feel like this here could benefit from another connection here with edges, just so that we have a better curvature and shape there. And now I'm gonna use target weld here. Take this vertex point and while being an edge constraint, drag it here a bit to the left. Let's connect these two. And this point here, I'm gonna go out of the edge constraint mode and also drag it closer here to our high poly. This point here, I'm gonna take an edge constraint and drag it a bit to the left. Sometimes you just wanna jump in and out of the edge constraint mode in order to get the best results. Edge constraint will move it along the line, and if you're out of it, you can move it freely. Let's have another edge connection here, and in that case I actually want to be out of the edge constraint so that we can now have more of a curve there where we have this nose. I'm going to take these vertex points here and position them individually. Here we can make a connection. And let's see what else we got here. Wireframe mode. And I want to target weld it here where we have this open edge pretty much, or where we had it. And this here could also use a connection. So this is looking better now as it did before. It's a nicer low poly model there. And as a next thing, I think we could collapse this ring here. I'm gonna just use Alt to not affect these two edges there at the front, but these here can be collapsed then. So now with target weld, we can also optimize it a bit more. This here could also be target welded. This doesn't really do much, so we should get rid of it then. And I'm going out of the target weld mode. Let's take a look at it here from a different perspective. I'm gonna take it into isolation mode so that we only have the parts without the horns and all that, so we see more what's going on here. And I want to be in the left orthographic view and rearrange this here a bit where we have this ring coming out of the head. So first of all, make sure you're not in edge constraint mode for that. And then we just position that here individually so that it follows the high poly as good as it can. These two vertex points here, we can also position them. And then the ones here at the back, let's just bring them a bit more here to the right. And this way, this is better aligned as it was before.